Welcome to Playthink, conversations about games, interactivity, art, and culture. This podcast is recorded live at the USC Game Innovation Lab, which is part of the USC Games program at the University of Southern California. For more information, follow us on Instagram at USC Game Innovation Lab or visit our website at gameinnovationlab.com/playthink. Welcome, everyone, to Playthink Salon. Tonight, we are thrilled to have the lovely Richard Lemarchand with us at long last. We've planned this for many years, actually. Richard is a game designer, educator, author, and consultant. He worked at Naughty Dog, where he led or co-led the design of all 3 PlayStation 3 games in the Uncharted series. He also helped to create the game series Gex and Soul Reaver at Crystal Dynamics. He is now a professor of cinematic arts here at the USC Games program, teaching game design, development, storytelling, and production. And he is the author of A Playful Production Process for Game Designers and Everyone, published by the MIT Press, which will be the topic of our conversation here today. And I am Tracy Fullerton. I am an experimental game designer, professor, and the founding director of the USC Games program, where I run the Game Innovation Lab, a research center for experimental games. I am the author of Game Design Workshop, a play-centric approach to creating innovative games, and also the well-read Game on Playing Thoughtfully from MIT Press, which I co-authored with Matthew Farber. So Richard, welcome.
Hello, Tracy. Hello, everyone. It's so good to be here in the USC Game Innovation Lab. Thank you for having me.
It is thrilling to have you here back from sabbatical to speak with us.
And I'm very excited to be appearing on the Playthink podcast. I've been involved with Playthink since pretty much the beginning, I think.
Exactly. And we've been threatening to have you on as a guest since the beginning.
Happy to make it happen.
Here we are. So let's actually start with an easy question about the book. So why did this book need to be written? What was it that you saw in industry and in academia that made this book necessary?
Well, as everyone who has ever tried to make a game knows, making games is really hard. I think it's the most difficult thing that I've ever done in my life, going from the inception of a game to finally finishing it, shipping it, as we say. And I think it's hard for a number of reasons. I mean, creativity is challenging for a start, right? Getting over the blank sheet of paper problem, coming up with something out of thin air. I think games are very challenging because they are systemic. That makes them much harder to make than a thing like a novel or a feature film, I think, because they're much less like objects and they're more like machines, right? They have all these moving parts that do unexpected things when they interact with each other. Another reason I think making games is hard is that a lot is unknown when you start out making a game, either because you're making a new kind of game that no one's ever made before, or because you are making a game of this kind for the first time, right? And you have to figure out how you go about making a game like this. And then, of course, there is the player who complicates things even further, that unknown quantity, an unimaginably complex being, just as complex as you, but outnumbering you by millions if a lot of people end up playing your game.
And they all do it differently.
And all doing unexpected things, right? When I started out in the game industry, we didn't have a lot of process for tackling these kinds of hard problems. And as my career went on through the industry, I noticed a lot of common problems, a lot of kind of gotchas. Things like the moving goalposts problem that maybe we'll talk about later, where you're trying hard to finish your game and you extend the timeline a bit more, but the harder you work with extended goals, then the more tired you get, the more mistakes you make. It becomes a kind of vicious cycle. At Naughty Dog, I think I really leveled up in my understanding of how to have good process around making games, thanks to my amazing colleagues there, including Mark Cerny and Michael John, who developed this thing called Method that I'll come back to, my friend Evan Wells, who was one of the co-presidents of Naughty Dog at the time, who taught me a lot about this process. And I think that games academia has had the same kinds of problems, right?
Yes, absolutely. It's funny. You were just talking about you just started with making games is hard, and I could have stopped you right there, and we could have just had an entire conversation about the sentence "making games is hard," right?
It's
Just trying
actually
to unpack that, right?
It's a kind of catchphrase for game developers. It's a thing that we would say to each other at Naughty Dog. You know, you'd walk past someone in the corridor and they were clearly like knotting their brains up with some difficult to solve problem. And you would just look at each other and one of you would go, making games is hard.
Exactly. Exactly. It's a horrible thing we do to ourselves. Yes, exactly.
It's really challenging. And so, you know, we started to figure out better process. I realized at some point, probably here at USC, that nobody had written down all these best practices in one place. And I thought that it would be really useful if somebody did. Mm-hmm. So even though there's not that many ideas in the book that don't come from somebody else, I have a few original ideas in there. But I'm really happy that I was the person who got to collate all this hard-won wisdom from industry, from academia, and set it down all in one place with your encouragement,
And
Tracy.
I'm really glad you did too, you know, because not only because I think it's useful for our students and for folks in industry, but because, you know, I want making games to be more for everyone, and that's sort of in the subtitle of your book, right? Yeah. It can never be for everyone if it's too hard, right?
No, I mean, there's a kind of social equity issue here, I think. You know, it's a truism that marginalized people have to work extra hard to achieve the same goals as people like me who hold various kinds of privilege. And if we were all using better practices all the time, the playing field would be a bit leveler. We would see more diverse kinds of games.
Exactly.
Games would be richer as a cultural form.
Exactly, exactly. So let's back up a minute and go to that title for a second, because you know, I remember when you first told me the title, and I asked you about this. Why? You know, what do you mean when you say a playful production process? Can you you know, sort of unpack a playful production process for me a little bit?
Yeah, well, I'm very happy that I have an alliterative title for my book. I like a bit of alliteration. And if we start in the middle, I mean, production is really like project management, right? That word has various meanings in different creative contexts. But in the context of video games, a game producer is someone who helps manage the project by facilitating it. Although I think, in truth, you know, everyone, no matter what discipline they work in, does a bit of game production. They have to. It's helpful to us all if we think in a production kind of mindset. Of course, process. Well, it's a truism that design is process. That's something that many students of other kinds of design learn on their first day. Right? It's to do with initial ideation in a sketchbook and then formalizing those drawings and evolving them through iteration and testing them in various ways. And so, yeah, I really like the idea that this book would help bring a bit more structured process to something which is by its very nature messy and organic, right?
Yes.
And then the playfulness, well, I actually owe this to you, I think, Tracy, because in her book, Game Design Workshop, Tracy coined this term, a play-centric game design process, where we keep play at the core of the process. You know, part of that is the play tests that we do from very, very early on. I mean, everyone here in the USC Games program starts playtesting pretty much the first week they design something, right? And I think that's very important, but also a kind of playful attitude. I think there's something attitudinal. I think that the word fun can misdirect us sometimes, but I really like this thing I heard somewhere probably in my first decade in the industry. You have to have fun to make fun. And I do think there's some truth in that.
I do too. I do feel that the culture that a game is made in shines through it, almost like the material that it's made of.
Right.
Right. And if it's coarse, if it's, you know, drudgery, right, then it will feel like it was made in that kind of a culture. And if you are having fun and loving it as you are building it, I think that shines through.
Yeah, I think that's right. Absolutely. It's the old alchemic principle of as above, so below.
Exactly.
Right? It trickles through.
Exactly. Well, you've already sort of brought it up, but my next question really is about, you and I we share similar thoughts about the importance of prototyping, especially, as you've mentioned, in the ideation and pre-production phases of design. But I think, one of you mentioned this in the book, and I was just sort of reading parts of it this week. But it's one of the lesser mentioned times for prototyping. But I'd love for you to sort of address it a little, and that's during production, right? So really, when is prototyping during production helpful, and when could it not be helpful?
Well, I think that prototyping can be really helpful very far through full production, this third phase where you're building out the game. I really like what you always say about our intro to game design class, where students are making board games and card games. And while, those folks may end up becoming professional board game and card game designers, it's not really a board game and card game class. It's a paper prototyping class, because you can learn a lot about the systems of a digital game by making quick, dirty paper prototypes, as we call them, right?
Of course.
So much of games are to do with number and logic and space and semantics, right? The meaning of language, which is structured by its own rules. And we can, just in a few minutes, we can stand up a whole new system to try something out to see if it might work in our digital game.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll learn more if we make a digital prototype. So I think paper prototyping can be really, really useful when you're just in the early phases of developing a system. Maybe you might be halfway through full production. You've got to make like a potion crafting system. You've never made one before. You've played a lot of games with potion crafting systems, but what is the right kind of game system for your game? Well, you could do that really, really easily, right?
Exactly, yeah.
One of the games I've been playing recently is Consume Me, and it's really amazing to see how Jenny paper prototyped a lot of the systems in that game with, pictures of food on paper cutouts. I even have a picture of it in my book.
I saw that,
yeah.
You have it in the book. Yes, that's lovely. It's a wonderful little prototype, yes.
And then the other way that I think prototyping can be really valuable in full production relates to a story that I tell very quickly in my book. So when we were working on the first Uncharted game, we had implemented early on, by the end of pre-production, we had implemented a shooting system that used a kind of lock-on mechanic where you locked onto an enemy and then Drake would automatically shoot towards that enemy, and the interest in the gameplay would come from changing that selection of the auto lock-on to deal with the most dangerous enemies or to deal with the enemies that had a clear line of sight to you. And it felt pretty good, but there was something not quite right about it. And Neil Druckmann, who is now one of the co-presidents of Naughty Dog, came to us. I was the lead game designer. Amy Hennig was the game director. Evan Wells was directing the studio, and said, "Look, I've got an idea for a way to improve this core shooting mechanic." We were all big fans of Resident Evil 4, and that has this interesting kind of hybridization of over-the-shoulder view of shooting. And we were like getting quite close to alpha. It was really late in the day to make a change like this. And but Neil was like, "Look, just give me a chance. I think we can do it." And so Evan said, "Okay, you can have a programmer. You've got a few days." They went away. They prototyped something up. And as soon as they came back, not only did we discover that this felt much more cinematic, because now you were looking towards the enemies that you were fighting. It didn't break any of the gameplay, and it just worked really well from a gameplay point of view. It didn't break the levels, very importantly, that we had built. So, yeah, there are times when you just need to stand up a prototype quickly.
And also sort of step aside from the production path, right? I mean, that's what prototyping really does. It's the realm of ideas,
Yep.
right?
That's
It's not the realm of production, which is the realm of execution.
Yep.
And you just step to one side for a moment and say, hang on, let's see if this could work.
And you can't do that too many times in full production.
Of course.
I think you really have to be careful about when you choose to do it. But this was a time when that really, really paid off.
It sounds great. It reminds me a little bit of some of the stories that Chaim Gingold tells about Spore.
Oh, yeah.
And some of the process that they had in the prototyping phases for that game, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Just kind of stepping aside and saying, well, let me do something entirely different and show you guys, right? So let's talk about I jumped into production. I'm sorry, I jumped right into the center of the pool.
No, that's
if
good.
You will.
That's good.
But I want to sort of jump back to the more of the beginnings. Not quite the beginning, but one step before that. I want to talk about pre-production. We are actually starting a new pre-production class here at USC Games for our advanced games classes. And one of the things that we advise students to do, as beginning with the beginning and intermediate classes, is to create a macro chart.
Yes.
And that is a deep part of the process that's described in the book. So I have noticed, as I talk to folks outside of USC Games, it's not as well adopted as some of the other types of documentation, right? So could you describe the macro chart and really, what its function is, how it works, like how we would make one and why it's important to make one? Especially for folks outside of this room who are listening to the podcast who might not have made one before.
Yeah, so this game design macro chart comes from that method of game development that my friends Mark Cerny and Michael John kind of codified based on their observations of what they had seen working really well at Naughty Dog, at Insomniac Games and other studios kind of in the Sony family. And it completely blew my mind when I first learned about it, and for a very specific reason. All the way back at the beginning of my career, it seemed that a big part of my job as someone with game designer in their title was to write these great, big, thick game design documents. Kind of,
I'm of that generation too.
Right? Yes, exactly. There's a lot of us survivors of
it
that
was
generation.
To sit in a room by ourselves and write 300 pages.
Write this thing, right? And it was based on this waterfall idea of game production that just like you would make a washing machine by getting some clever engineers who would make some plans for a new washing machine and then they'd hand it over to the people who build the washing machine. We thought that's how games were made. So we would type up and print out this thing like 1.5 inches thick, this wad of paper. And I vividly remember, Tracy, I would go around my team and I would hand out this document to them. And then I would, and they would look at it. And they would set it down on the corner of our desk, of their desk, and I would come back like a few days later, and I would see that it was still in exactly the same position. It hadn't moved one bit. It was clear they hadn't read it, right? Because I don't know, it's hard to read a great big wedge of dry game design documentation.
Of course it is.
So what the game design macro chart is this lightweight, very easy to read map of the whole game that you are planning to make, and you write it in a spreadsheet, so it has rows and columns, and the columns can be for different things depending on the type of game, but typically you would have like the location that the game takes place in, the gameplay that happens there, the story that happens there, the enemies that you encounter there, the objects and items that you find there, any friendly characters that you meet there, and you just grid it all out. I mean, it's the kind of thing I think that a DM does when they're planning an adventure, right?
Absolutely. And when you say the word map, of course, that immediately locks us on target of what it's for.
Exactly, yes.
The map isn't the journey.
No.
Right?
It is an overview of the journey. And I always talk about about the way that you can, with an overview map of the entire British Isles, you can plan a trip round the UK and which cities you want to go to, and maybe even whether you're going to go by road or train to get there. You don't use that map to plan out all the little details of your visit to the Natural History Museum or what have you, but it allows you to make a plan, and that's what the game design macro chart is.
Yes.
And it gives you so much. It gives you a starting point for conversation with your team. So at Naughty Dog, quite contrary to my experience with no one reading those big, thick game design documents, we would, once the core gameplay and story team had finalized the macro close to the end of pre-production, we would send it out to the studio through email. And we had a sense that by the end of the afternoon, just about everyone in the studio had at least skim read it. Like everyone would read it because everyone wants to know, well, what is the game that we're making, right? What kind of levels is it going to have? What kind of gameplay and story events is it going to have? And yeah, just by double clicking on a spreadsheet and opening it up and skimming down, they could see very, very quickly what was going to go into the game. And then, of course, anyone involved in project management, production, can start to plan out, well, this level's quite big, it has a lot going on in it, this is a smaller level, how many people are we going to need to build these levels and these objects and to script them and to do all of the associated design, art, animation, audio. So this is the other very important role of it. It gives you a clear idea about the scope of your project.
Exactly.
And of course, scope is the thing that always gets game developers.
It's at the heart of it all,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
It's why we sigh each other and say game development is hard, right?
Right.
It's hard because it's 99.9% of the time too much.
Yes.
It's too much, and that's why it's hard, right? It would be hard even if it was properly scoped, but the fact that it's almost always overscoped makes it that sighing amount of hard.
Exactly. Exactly. I mean, it's a running joke between us all here at USC Games that nobody ever underscopes a project. If anybody here ever hears of an underscope project, please let me know, because it will be an historic event and it will need to be researched and documented.
We'll have to take that macro chart and frame it on the wall. Exactly.
Yeah. No, it's a real challenge.
Exactly. And so you've already sort of touched on my next question, to anticipate it a little. You've talked about the kinds of discussions, that a macro chart can engender, right? So the kinds of things that, for example, a producer wants to know,
yes,
or an art director wants to know,
yep,
for example, a level designer or a writer. All of these folks are going to look at it with their lens. And yet they will also be able to see the sort of what the other people are interested in. And that's one of the beauties. It's not just a document for the artist. It's not just for the engineers, right? It's for everybody to see the 30,000-foot view of the project, right?
Yep.
And so, one of the things I actually love, and you I remember you sent me the picture of the Journey macro, which was on the display, I think, at the
Victoria and Albert Museum in the video games.
Exactly. And one of the beautiful things about it was the way that it had been customized for that game, right? And so it not only had what the art directors need to know, and it also touched upon what stages of the monomyth that Genova wanted to hit in each of the sequences. It touched upon, the animation, how long the capes were and all that kind of stuff. But also, what questions was the player going to be asking of themselves?
Yes.
It had a column called like the player's consciousness with a list of questions.
That's my favorite column.
Player's consciousness, And I think it's just lovely to think that the macro itself is actually a malleable format.
Yeah.
Right. We have a template that we give to students, right? But we often say things like, make this yours.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
I mean, there are things that we want to start with, but then there's this thing. Okay, what are you making, and what is it going to take to communicate it? Right.
I think the word that you just used, the fact that it's malleable, it's very easily changed, and that's really good while you're going through pre-production. We would start. Amy Hennig would start by writing our ideas on index cards and sticking them up on a corkboard in her office, which is actually an idea that comes from Blake Snyder's book, Save the Cat, a screenwriting book, where he recommends this way of planning a screenplay. But it works really well for games.
And it's been, writers have used it for years.
Right, yes, and probably predates
classic
that book.
Index cards.
Yeah.
On the corkboard. It's a classic writer's tool.
And so you can move things around, and you can move cells around, rearrange the cells until eventually you've got something that you think is going to work, and then you lock it into place.
Exactly. And do you lock it, though? That's the wonderful thing. I mean, that's part of some of the other things I was going to ask you about. Like, who is the keeper of the macro chart? Right? If you think about that, who owns that? Do you truly lock it ever? Or does it remain malleable?
Well, so this was a pretty important point on the projects that I worked on at Naughty Dog. But let me answer your first question first. I think that the macro clearly belongs to everyone on the team, and it's been collated from ideas which could have come from absolutely everyone on the team. Part of the reason that my book has the subtitle for game designers and everyone is that I firmly believe that whether you are an animator or an audio person, or whether you work in quality assurance and QA, you are a game designer. If you touch the game in some way, you are shaping the player's experience, and that means that you are a game designer. So I think that the macro kind of belongs to everyone, but the people who are responsible for making sure that it's as good as it can be are the most senior leadership on the game team. And most of the projects that I worked on at Naughty Dog had two directors, a creative director and a game director, who would work in absolute lockstep. The game director, a bit more responsible for gameplay, the creative director, a bit more responsible for story and performances. But of course, those two people have to be in absolute sync. So I would say it's let's say there's a game director. The macro really is ultimately their responsibility. And as well as of exceedingly high interest to the lead producer or an executive producer or studio president, right? These folks should know the macro absolutely inside out, should be the keeper of it, should always be looking for problems, even as small as typos, right? And making sure that this is a healthy living document. They should know it like the back of their hand. It's the ultimate roadmap for the project, of course.
Exactly. I'm so glad you said that, to be honest. And then, I guess there's this question I would ask you about change.
Yes.
Right?
So this is the big thing. At Naughty Dog, we would always want to make the macro as close to perfect by the end of pre-production as it could be. We wanted to go into full production and never change the macro. Partly because we wanted to defend against scope creep, right?
What about the other way, though? What if you have to cut it?
Well, no, because inevitably you have to cut it, right?
Yeah.
So you want to try and have made good decisions so that you have chosen a project of roughly the right size. Mm-hmm. But yes, it is okay to cut things.
Okay.
In fact, it's encouraged.
All right. That's something I often have discussions with my thesis students as I have them mark it, and some of them are smiling, I have them mark it in colors to say which might be cut. If we get to this point,
right,
which are the ones that have to be, and which are the ones that are vulnerable to cutting?
Yes, I learned a new acronym this summer from a friend of mine, and I realized that we were already using this, but it's MOSCW, MSCW. It's like must have, should have, could have, won't have.
Okay,
is the final one.
Nice.
And yeah, it's really the good thing about the macro is that it is modular, right? It's in a spreadsheet. It's highly modular, and you can cut things. Mm-hmm. This is why in my book I recommend building the second. If let's say we divide our game into 4 parts, right? First, second, third, fourth. You build the second part first, and quite early from the second part, with a lot of the representative core gameplay, and then you build the first part because now you know where you're leading up to in the second part, right? You know what kind of onboarding, tutorialization you're going to have. Then you should build the fourth part, the end, next after that, so that you have got a good place to arrive at. So the end of your game is really good and satisfying, and then finally you can work on that third part in the sequence, because that's the part that, like a concertina or an accordion, can like stretch or squash based on how much time you have left.
And can be tuned. It's so interesting because I happened to show a sequence from Genova Chen talking about the development process of Journey in my intro design class today, where he talked about the final year, where they took an extra year to make sure that the last few sequences led up properly to the end. It's exactly what you just said. They were there.
Yes,
but
I remember this.
But they were not. The delta of emotional change was
Right.
not strong enough.
Yes, yes.
So they basically took an extra year to make the delta of emotional change correct, so that players truly felt that they died on their way up this mountain, right? And were reborn.
That's what I think the game design macro chart is always good for. It allows you, the designer, to focus on the structure of the experience that you're going to give your players.
Structure of the experience.
In terms of the rhythm and the pacing.
Exactly.
Yep.
And here's my one problem, Richard. Maybe
Yep.
you can help me solve this.
Yep.
So the macro that we know, the traditional one,
Yep.
is vertical. It starts with in time. It starts at the top and goes down.
Yes.
Genova does his horizontally. And the reason is that way he can mark an intensity across the top in time, right?
Whenever I lecture about the macro, I always point this out, and I show that wonderful kind of color board, so that which the art director made, so that we could see the evolving color palette, as well as all those wonderful diagrams of Genova's with kind of intensity, rising and falling intensity over time. Yeah, it is good if you have time go horizontal, and I always
go
point
back
this
and
out
forth
to students and
because
industry folks.
some of my students want to do it horizontally and some vertically, and I'm like,
well,
is there a reason one or the other, and am I just getting semantically like involved in whether it's vertical or horizontal?
I'm a big believer that in most things in life, there's no one right way. Rules are meant to be broken. Whatever works best for you is good with me.
Okay, because I was hoping for a best practice out of you.
I think that flexibility is the best practice, Tracy.
Is the best practice. I love it. I love it. That's good. So what this really leads us to is this at the heart of your book is the idea of concentric design. We've gone through our ideation and our pre-production, and we've built our macro. And as you said, at the end of pre-production, we have agreed on this macro.
Yep.
Now we may cut some of it, but we have agreed on it as a team,
Yep.
right? And we are part of this flow, this overarching flow that you describe of concentric design. That is a very important milestone in that moment. Could you talk about the flow of how you see a project evolving under concentric design, like from the very first inkling when we say, I would like to make a game like this, through its final iterations?
So this is something that I really learned about from Evan Wells, I think, my friend who mentored me a lot as a game designer at Naughty Dog. And, he said when I arrived at the studio, towards the end of the third Jak and Daxter game, he said, look, the way that we've always worked on core mechanics is that we work on them on a particular mechanic or a group of mechanics, like a player character, and we work on them pretty much until they're done. We don't do anything else until a particular sort of module or subunit of the game is finished, is ready to ship it, right? I now that I've been using this method of concentric development in my classes, I've really seen it work very well, because I think everyone has a tendency, especially people who can code very well, of just throwing lots of stuff into the game and leaving it in kind of placeholder form, leaving player characters represented by those capsules and things like that, right? The problem with that is that you don't really know how much time it's going to take you to bring all those things to a nicely finished level. And so you're really setting yourself up for a lot of nasty surprises later. So the thing that I do in my classes, where we use my book as the textbook, my production and design classes, is that I am always hectoring people to get that player character in the game and really don't do anything else until it's got a nice looking run cycle, a nice looking jump animation, a nice looking 3D model, 3D textures, audio and visual effects for all of those things, just running around in a blank boxy room, right? So that we know how much time it's going to take us to get to a place with this core player character, the thing that we're going to spend 99% of our time looking at in the game or looking around in the game, so that it's there and finished. Even things like an idle animation, that little ambient animation that plays, the character breathing or what have you, that should be done before you move on to other things, at least in a quick and dirty form. You can always come back later and polish. And there's this quote, which you reminded me of, Tracy, by John Wooden, who was the UCLA basketball coach. Yeah. He said, if you don't have time to do it right, when will you have time to do it over? And it's this great idea that, if we don't have time to do it right now, we're definitely not going to have time to do it later on. So if you build out your game in this kind of rational order, in the way that Evan, told me that they'd been doing for ages at Naughty Dog, what happens is that everything in your game is always great. Right? You build this and you finish it and it's in the game and it's good, it's working, ready to be polished up to excellent. You make your first enemy and you finish that. You finish that enemy. Don't put a second enemy in the game until you finish that enemy. We use techniques like the beautiful corner to learn the answers to questions about how long it takes us to build parts of the environment. And of course, on a team of more than like a couple of people, you can begin to parallelize these tasks, right? So that different groups of people could be working on things at the same time. But if you adopt this order, the reason it's called concentric development is like you start from the core and then you work out to the second ring of game mechanics and all of the content that supports that around it, and then the third layer out and the fourth layer out. And you end up very naturally, very organically with a great game without running out of time.
Yes, because wherever you stop, you'll have something, right? And all of those things will be great.
And this is part of the unsung beauty of game design. As difficult as game design is, it is very, very often the case that if you, a designer, are given half a dozen random systems, with a clever bit of game design thinking, you can transform them into an amazing, coherent game that fits together in lots of wonderful ways, right? I mean, this is the beauty of the kind of roguelikes that we've been discussing, right? Roguelikes are built of interlocking systems that some clever designer, programmer, artist, animator has gone, oh, hang on, we've made a new system here. Now, why don't we make it relate to these 6 other systems in the game? And suddenly we get all of these possible combinations, right? That's the kind of thinking that I think is part of the beauty of our craft as game designers.
I think that's really lovely. I think it's a really lovely. I feel like it's very organic. To me, it feels like the onion layers, right?
Yes.
And, always, if you start at the core, you layer it out, you always have an onion.
Yes.
We just don't know how big and lovely
and,
luscious that onion will be.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
Yes. So I think that's really a wonderful way of thinking about it. So speaking of, I want to encourage people to be thinking of questions, because I'm going to at some point turn it over to you. So speaking of concentric development, a lot of projects do get stuck at some point in the process, right? And I'm just wondering if you have advice or thoughts on how this, the playful production process techniques that you are, writing about, how can that help people get unstuck?
Yep. Well, I think there are many reasons why people get stuck. I mean, all design is about problem solving, and some problems are really hard. Some problems are so hard that they don't have solutions, that they're insoluble problems, right? I think one reason that people get stuck is that they can't find that core, that kind of kernel of the game. They thought they were going to find it, and they implement a load of stuff, and it's just not materializing. And they've tried this, and they have tried that, and they haven't been able to find a little set of core systems that hang together. They can't find the really enjoyable, interesting contents of what would be in the vertical slice, that first playable that you make by the end of pre-production. And I think that the emphasis that the playful production process puts on pre-production can really help with that, right? My friend Mark Cerny says that pre-production can't be scheduled like full production can. It has to be this kind of very free-form, almost chaotic process that most creative people will recognize, right? Where we're just trying things out and we make something and we kind of like it, but it's not there yet. So we throw it again and we make another thing, and it's a little better this time, right?
Yes, but what's interesting about that is when you're doing that by yourself, it's okay if it doesn't turn out to be something. Like if you're making a sketch of something, right, in your sketchbook, and it turns out gross, you're like, oh, this is terrible, and you just move on to the next page.
Right.
Fine, but I think one of the things that gets people stuck is that they want to find it so badly that they force themselves to believe that they've found it.
Ah, right. Yes. I mean, that can be an issue. Yes. And I think then it's up to the people around that person to be kind but candid with them, right? And say, well, look, it's not my experience that this is enjoyable, or I'm going to want to come back to this after time. Yeah. I think that maybe a bigger problem is people who have very high creative standards, and they build something and it's really good and everyone's really enjoying it and everyone's really enjoying playing it, but it's not good enough for that person who made it. And it can be really, really hard to commit to an idea, right? To say, okay, right, this is it. And I think that it's useful, I talk about this in the book, to have a time limit for pre-production. Yeah. I mean, you can time box any kind of work that you do by giving it like 4 hours and saying, I've got to get this task done by the end of the morning. But you can also time box a whole phase of a project by saying, like, at Naughty Dog, we might have 6 months for pre-production, and we've got to be done by the end of pre-production. That can really, I think just the simple expediency of having a time limit can really force people to commit and say, okay, I've done enough thinking. It's a bit like playing chess with a clock, right?
You've got to make a move.
You just got to make a move and do it and hit the clock.
Exactly.
The other thing, though, that I talk about in the book, and which Mark Cerny talks about really eloquently in this talk that he gave at the DICE Summit about method, is that when we get to the end of pre-production, the team has used up the time that they had for making vertical slice and the game design macro. Now is our time to evaluate the project. Whoever the project stakeholders are, it might be a publisher who's going to fund the project, or it might be a professor in a class. Yeah. And we don't do this in our program, but we don't stop projects midstream, but at least not very often. But we, in industry, at the end of pre-production, we have to say, is this something that we want to greenlight? Do we have confidence that the team have proven that they've really got something here and we're ready to fund it for the rest of development? Or do we think they're onto something, but they're not quite there yet, and maybe we'll fund them for just a little bit more time, to spend some more time in pre-production? Yes. This is something that I believe would happen at Sony Computer Entertainment.
Absolutely.
Or do we want to make that difficult decision and say, actually, no, we don't think this is going to work, even though you gave it your best shot, and it's time for us to cancel this project. Which
could be actually a blessing, because, you've seen projects go forth without a plan, without with a commitment but no plan.
And this is the thing that I actually find quite moving, that Mark Cerny talks about in this lecture. He says there can be a thing in game development cultures, I think he calls it like the stink of failure or something like that. The idea that if you have a cancelled project, that you are not a good designer or developer. And he says he doesn't believe that's true. He explicitly says that a team that has a project cancelled at the end of pre-production should be proud of themselves, because they have done everything they could do to successfully prove that this game idea was not viable. And that's something that should be celebrated, right?
It's like science almost, because that's what the scientific method is.
Exactly.
Right? And so I agree with that. It's not failure. It's progress.
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
It's that we've put a stamp on it and said, well, we couldn't solve this. Now, it's not to say that it couldn't be solved by another team at another time with other knowledge and other backgrounds and
Yep.
input, whatever.
Yep.
For us, this is not the time,
Yes.
right?
Right.
And we'll all go off proudly and do other things
Yeah.
now,
Yep.
right? And I
Yes.
think that's fine, because if you go on, now you're just meandering.
And of course, no design idea is ever wasted. You know, if you did a load of design work on a project and you end up not using it, you put it in your game designer's back pocket. You know, time and time again on the Uncharted games, we would say, you know what, this idea can't make it into this game, and we'd end up using it on the next game or the game after that. You know, whether it's advances in technology that make a game with 1 million sprites moving around possible when it wasn't a few years ago, or when the cultural climate around games changes, right? And suddenly ideas that people weren't interested in before are suddenly interesting to large numbers of people who play games.
Precisely.
I think that, no design work is ever wasted.
Exactly. Well, I had more questions, but I want to give it over to the folks here for questions, actually. Does anyone want to come up here? We have a microphone. Does anyone like to ask Richard a question? Come on right up here so you can put that stool there and there you
I
go.
can kneel. Oh, I'll take this.
And introduce yourself.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Jason. I'm a second-year MFA student here, and I am currently in the 532 class, which is the class at USC Games that deals with the
Yes.
Playful Production Process book.
Right.
Wonderful class, and I absolutely adore the book.
Oh, thanks, Jason.
And I have a question related to transferring that knowledge from that class to the director role in the thesis. Because in that class, you're working on a real like partnership, almost like co-directors and workers
Yes.
on the project at the same time.
Yep.
But transitioning towards the interactive project where you're the sole director, how do you maintain that playful production process when it's just you?
Right.
there?
Oh, that's a really interesting question, Jason. Yeah. Because, of course, in the class that you're in, you work in a team of 2, and that's by design, right? Occasionally we'll have a team of 3, but we think that a team of 2 is very best for just maximal learning in that class, in collaboration, as well as having someone to bounce ideas off and, you know, say, oh, okay, well, we've got to write this macro now. How are we going to do this? And it's lonely at the top, as they say. You know, seriously, I think it can be really challenging to be the sole director of a project. It can be quite intimidating. You've got all this responsibility. The best answer I have for you, I think, is that just as in the class that you're taking, I always say to my students, well, you're on one team of 2 people, but you're also on another team of 18 people. There's 16 students in the class, me and my student aide, and we're all here to help each other. So, you know, as a student here, you have a cohort around you, people doing the same thing as you. And so you should count on them for help. And you'll probably find that there are some people in that cohort that maybe you share interests in a certain kind of game about, and you should put your head together with them. Don't try and do it all yourself, you know. I think that it's so much easier to solve problems when you're in dialogue with others than when you're just up in your head. We have a real tendency to go around in circles when we're up in our heads,
Yes,
right?
Totally.
So, yeah, I think look to the greater team of your cohort and they will guide you. Also, you know, you'll have folks on your team, your leads, working as a lead game designer under the amazing game and creative directors I worked under. I always saw it as my role to be their sounding board, right? And to talk through really most everything with them that was of interest to me. I was kind of the first line of defense, and also someone who would propagate that information to the rest of the team. So those leads will also be your close allies in the way that your partner in 532 is.
Excellent. That was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks,
great.
Jason. Great question.
Come on up. Then you can
Hello.
Hello.
I'm Sarah. I'm a little bit of an infiltrator. I'm a narrative designer at an indie studio.
Oh, very cool.
And my question kind of pertains to the work that I do. I was wondering if, I know that in your book, a lot of like the methodologies that you talk about are applicable to like studios of different sizes and game making across whether it's solo versus larger teams. But a lot of the experience that you talked about was in AAA development. I was
Yeah.
wondering if you have any particular perspectives or advice for like smaller indie studios that maybe have like super strict timelines and funding that stretch a little more thin and very few hands on deck and everyone kind of just scrambling to kind of get everything together as best as possible?
Yeah, well, when I started writing the book, I had been teaching the class that we were just talking about for 7 years, and then I taught it for another 3 more years by the time the book was really done and done. And I have a lot of friends in indie games, and I tried to write a book that, as you say, would be useful for people as big as the teams that I worked on in the mainstream of the industry, down to just 1 or 2 people. In answer to your question, I think that pre-production is a key to this. If you can have a strong pre-production phase where you create these milestones of a vertical slice, something playable, that's tells you so much more than any game design document would about what kind of game you're going to make and what kind of aesthetic qualities it has, what kind of experiential qualities it has for players. If you can create this game design macro, this document that is your roadmap, and then a schedule, so that you've done due diligence on figuring out whether you'll be able to actually build the thing that you're planning to build in full production, then you're setting yourself up for success. And of course, things are going to continue to change as you head through full production. This is where you have to keep that famous agile mentality of treating change as an opportunity rather than a crisis. Something which is easier said than done in my experience. But yeah, hanging on to that flexibility of getting ready to cut, of always looking ahead. I think a good designer and a good producer is always looking at the near future, the mid future, and the far future, trying to see problems coming down the pipe and rooting around them, whether it's to do with scope or other kinds of issues that you might face.
Great. Perfect. Thank you so much.
Wicked. Thank you very much.
Can you get forward? Yes.
Hi, I'm Sankalp. I'm a first-year MS student, and I actually wanted to flip the question that Jason had. My friend and I are currently in the process of pitching a game, and we're co-directing it. So there's just 2 of us, and that kind of creates this issue where we might have disagreements about some creative aspects about the game, and we're too early in the process to even prototype it or anything of the sort. So it's just, this is my opinion, this is your opinion, and it's extremely difficult to choose. Sometimes we have a mediator who might have an opinion,
yes,
but at the end of the day, it's currently just the 2 of us, and it's like, how would you go about like making a decision that's best for the game in a scenario like this?
Well, I know how challenging this is because for many of the projects I worked on, I had a co-lead game designer. And we wouldn't always see eye to eye, the various folks that I work with as co-lead game designer. There are several different ways that you can deal with this. One thing that we would always do at Naughty Dog would be that we would thrash it out in conversation as much as we could. We would respectfully argue with each other as vigorously as we could, always playing nice and keeping it friendly. And then if we couldn't reach an agreement, maybe sometimes we'd toss a coin, but very often we would go to one of the directors and say, what do you think? And you already alluded to this, right? It's really good to have someone who's kind of a little bit out of the loop, some kind of mentor or advisor who can help guide you. I actually think, though, that you kind of answered your own question, because I think that the best way to resolve a game design dispute is with some prototyping. And it is never too early to prototype. I think you should be prototyping on the first day. Paper prototyping, as Tracy is sneezing out there. Yeah, because very often that will immediately resolve a dispute, right? You can straight away see what kinds of design issues are in play. So yeah, I would question that assumption that it's too early to prototype, and just get out the card, the index cards and your pens and some scissors and have fun. And you'll soon find the fun.
Do we have we have one here and then one here.
Hi, I'm Nara. I'm a junior in the Game Design and Development program, BFA. And I actually had 2 questions, if that's okay.
Give them to me one at a time, though,
okay.
Nara.
Yes. So the first one, so a lot of the, like, I guess, design philosophy that I have tried implementing in my own processes and everything has actually been from both of your books.
Oh,
And so it's, I don't know, working with it, I've noticed like some areas where I'm like, this is really great, but I don't know if it works for me. And so I was just kind of curious, I guess for both of you, like what you think on like how to go about like molding a already structured philosophy to fit the background and context that you come from.
yeah. Well, I think this is a perennial question for creative people. You have found something that works, but you don't really like it. Is that kind of the situation
yeah.
you're describing? And we were just kind of talking around this in various ways. I really like idiosyncratic art. Maybe it's because the kind of background that I come from, I like a lot of punk and new wave music. I like a lot of novelists who are outsiders in their day. I like a lot of indie and art house film. And I think that this is some of the most interesting stuff that speaks to me about my experience in my life, So I also was very tuned in when the indie game revolution was happening, and there were lots of great ideas moving around then, people wanting to make new kinds of games with more unique voices, right, and investigating kinds of gameplay that were not being investigated. So I kind of want to nudge you in the direction of following your own star, pursuing your own passions. In the context that you're in, though, currently involved in a game program at a university, there's a balancing act to be had here, right? Because I think that if you're making a game for a class where you're learning many, many different things, there will come a time when you have to commit to a design decision so that you make something rather than nothing. And it is okay to make something that doesn't meet up to your high standards. PBS broadcaster Ira Glass, whose show This American Life I really like, has this great quote about this concept of the gap, which is the gap between your excellent taste and what you are able to make at this moment in time. And a lot of creative people give up because that gap is too big for them to bear, right? They're never satisfied with their own work. And the advice he gives is to just keep making and finishing things. Keep turning the handle, and eventually the things you make will get close to the things that you really love with your unique and excellent taste. I got to tell you, as one creative person to another, I don't think the things that you make will ever truly satisfy you in the way that your favorite artworks by other people do.
They can never surprise you in the way that those
No.
favorite artworks do, right?
Oh, that's a good point, Tracy.
You know them too well.
You know them
see
inside out.
All their warts.
Yes, you know
But
all that.
if I'm understanding your original question, you're also asking about the processes that we're teaching and whether or not they should be your processes.
Oh.
Is that am I
little
understanding
bit,
a little
yeah.
bit there? So for example, you don't find necessarily that the way we teach paper prototyping is exactly the way you would sketch a game, so to speak, right? And I think that is a very wise thing to recognize. So we're teaching you what has worked for us, but I will also say that it's not always the way that I prototype, right? So sometimes I prototype by making a collage of visuals or sounds. And sometimes I prototype by making an index card deck of resources, and I figure out how those might be used in the game. And sometimes I prototype by making a board game, right? It's different for every project. And there's a great quote by, I think it's Rainer Nitzia, the board game designer, who said that he doesn't use the same project. I'm paraphrasing now, but he doesn't use the same process every time because he would wind up in the same place. he uses a different process for every project because he's looking to wind up in a different destination.
Right.
So one thing to keep in mind is that we're teaching generalized processes here, but you as an artist will discover what you need for you, but also what you need for each project, and that will grow your experience and your confidence to be able to use those when necessary.
Oh, thank you.
I think that's really wise, Tracy. Yep.
Yeah. And my
Oh, you had another question. That's right.
yes.
And then we have one more question.
So you both mentioned something at the beginning about like, oh, games are really hard to make. And I completely agree. But I guess I almost want to push back on it a little bit.
No, go for it.
Because there's like this big concept. I think it's been a concept for a long time, but I know it's very popular in my generation where it's like the tortured artist is the only valid artist. And me and my friends really try pushing back on that idea because it's like you don't need to be it. Because the tortured artist stems more from like this idea of like you have to have had hardship in order to be a good artist, and everyone goes through hardship to some extent, and I don't want to say like, oh, if you've gone through nothing or if you've gone through bad stuff in your life you can't be a good artist, because you can be, and you know you can draw from a lot of emotion, but I also don't think we should encourage that. Like
I think you're right.
Yes.
And I think Richard especially, this is his soapbox.
Yeah.
Let us get on.
I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a lot that in our modern culture valorizes various kinds of bad stuff around this, around what you're describing. For example, I heard you alluding to the fact that if art doesn't contain pain, struggle, or awful things, then it's not real art. It's not good art. It's not serious art. And I think, that's wrong. I mean, those are often rules laid down by patriarchy, I think. And I think we should celebrate more than that. You know, there's a wide range of human experience.
Yeah.
I also think that it's one of the ways that toxic work cultures can persist is the idea that, well, it's just hard and we should just get used to it, right? I think that's completely wrong. That's a big part of why I wanted to write a book like this, to try and dismantle those bad attitudes and bring new systems, new, better ways that involve less difficulty into being.
Yeah, because like I guess for me, I would almost... This is not like my like actual like if you were to ask me and I had time to think about it, I would not define art exactly this way, but a working definition I sometimes use is like art is an emotional experience. And happy emotions, positive emotions are still emotions.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm a big solar punk fan. I don't know if this is something that's catching on. I mean, I was an old school cyberpunk since I read William Gibson in the mid-'80s. But I love these ideas around solar punk, that if we don't have genres of fiction that model brighter, more hopeful futures where we are solving some of the terrible problems that we face, how are we going to have the hope in this present moment to get on and solve them? So I really love the ideas that you're bringing to the table here, Nara.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Wonderful questions. We have time for one more question, I believe. So come on up and be our final question.
Hello.
My
name is Kylie Shan, and I'm a first-year MS game design student.
Oh, nice to meet you.
So here's a recent issue I've been dealing with my project in class. And instead of dispute with other teammates in my group, we are quite a peaceful group in pre-production phase. But then here comes the issue. We think of every ideas we think are so cool. So we think this is cool, that's cool, and that is cool. So we have so many ideas we want to try out. But in realistic, we don't have so much time to prototype every ideas we want to try out. So how you manage to decide which idea you give in priority?
Oh, well, I've always thought that a big part of being a designer or an artist is balancing your rationality and your intuition. And I think the more you do something creative, the more you can kind of sideload the rationality into the intuition. In fact, I think there's a lot of cognitive neuroscience study about this right now that says this is actually what happens in the brain. Tasks that we have to think through carefully get kind of hardwired into the neuronal connections in your brain. This is why you have Tetris dreams or dreams about a video game that has a lot of high cognitive load, but that gets easier and easier the more you play it. Your brain is actually changing its physical structure to create new connections in your brain to do the tasks that you need to do to play the game well more quickly, more efficiently, in a more optimized way. So I think that, rationality and intuition have this strong relationship. And as we are learning and growing as designers, we're developing our capabilities in both. And the more time goes by, the more we can rely on our intuition, is what I'm trying to say. But for now, I would say there's a few different ways you can handle this problem. I love spreadsheets and I love making lists. Tracy, we skipped over this, but
I know, I'm sorry.
I think one of the good things that game designers should do for documentation is to just make lists of what's in the game and then keep them up to date. And if you can do those two things, you don't need any big, thick game design documents, just a small number of up-to-date lists. So, but lists are better when they're two-dimensional, when you've got rows and columns. So you can play a game, you could write down all your ideas in a spreadsheet, and then you and your teammate or teammates could put a number next to each idea, or maybe even better than that, an emoji, right, to have a new way of looking at your shared enthusiasm or lack of enthusiasm for these ideas, and then bubble the ones to the top using both a rational process of debate and discussion about what's going to work.
We have the resources and skills to do these ideas, but we have high enthusiasm for a different idea. Is there an idea for which we have both the skills and enthusiasm, right? So yes. You can build a spreadsheet that allows you to measure the idea from different lenses.
Yep. So bring a little bit of structure, turn it into a game, and remember that at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Ideas are cheap. Ideas are 10 a penny. What counts is the ability to execute on ideas. And the wonderful thing about being in a game design program is that you get to make game after game after game, growing your skills all the time.
I see. That's very helpful. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you for that great question.
It's extremely helpful. And it reminds me of this quote at the very beginning of your book. You were talking about ideas, right? And this lovely quote that I always recall here, we must collect our thoughts, for the unexpected is always upon us. Isn't that lovely? It's Charles Baxter from The Feast of Love.
Yep.
And it's really, I don't know. There's something wonderful about the ideas about we must collect our thoughts, almost like luggage. This is our to-go pack, right? We must have these things already about us, because the unexpected,
is coming.
It's coming
down
right?
the pike towards us.
And it perfectly describes the reason for the process, the reason for the macro, the reason for making all of these decisions and having them collected at the ready. So that we can rationally and intuitively make decisions when we need to.
Well, thanks, Tracy. I'm fond of that quote as well.
Yes. So thank you, everyone, and thank you so much, Richard, for this discussion and for your work, which I really, truly believe has enlightened us in the field of game design with its thoughtfulness, and its creativity and its inspirational nature. And I feel that we here are genuinely lucky to have you as a part of our community here at USC Games, and now as part of the podcast on Playthink. So let us thank Richard for this great conversation.
Thanks, Tracy. Thank you, everyone. It's been a pleasure and a privilege.